Welcome back. It's time for our first panel. The independent workforce is the fastest growing segment of the labor market. In fact, it's outpacing the U.S. workforce by 300% over the last 6 years. Independent talent is poised to play a critical role in the post-COVID-19 economy. And as companies adapt to this changing workforce, they're increasingly engaging the high-skilled independent talents as a key business strategy moving forward. Today, on this panel, we'll hear from 4 top-rated independent professionals who will share how they built a thriving business while offering advice to companies on how to embrace this new world of work. We're excited to have all of you. I'd like to introduce each of our panelists, and let's get this conversation started. Our first panelist is Brad Martin. He is an augmented reality, virtual reality specialist. He is the founder of Another Reality Studio. Next, we have David Kittle. He's a product and industrial designer. Next, we have Jamie Hollander, marketing leader, founder of RRDA. And finally, Yunchi Wilson. She's a fractional CMO and she's owner of Solomon Bell Consulting. Welcome to all 4 of you. Here's the first question. I'll just get this going. How did you get started working as an independent professional?
I can kick that off.
Wonderful.
I got started actually due to health issues. I was pregnant with my second daughter. And I was dealing with a lot of stress, traveling a lot, dealing with corporate America, trying to climb the corporate ladder, do, all the things they tell you to do. And I ended up having a mock stroke while I was 5 months pregnant with her and almost lost her. And it made me take a really hard look at what I was doing with my career and my time and my family, and it put some things in check. And it was then that year that I shifted over, and I've never looked back since.
Yeah. I can see that. Anybody else?
I can go ahead and take it on. So I started about 14 years ago, initially a way to gain more experience in my field and earn a little extra money on the side for my family. Fast forward 10 years, I was getting month to month long waiting list for my services. And that's when me and my family decided that, hey, maybe freelancing is a great opportunity for us. So 4 years ago, I jumped off full-time freelancing, and I haven't looked back since.
Jamie, let me put this question to you. How is working independently different from a traditional full-time job?
That's a great question. It's so similar and it's so different at the same time. I think that and I would imagine the other folks would agree, there is that level of flexibility that I think makes this so appealing to so many people. But at the same time, I really do structure my day just like I would if I were going to a kind of traditional 9 to 5. I get up, I kind of get situated and really am putting in probably more hours, because I live in New York. There's not the commute. There's not all of that downtime. But it's, I think like other folks have said, there is really an ability to pursue what you're interested in, to kind of steer your own days within reason, and really kind of focus. And I think through it, I spent about 17 years in media, and your day is really defined by the needs of your brand. Whereas if there's something that I find that I'm interested in or I am good at or it just seems really cool and I want to learn more, I can go find more clients, more projects, in that universe, and really kind of create my own course, my own path for myself and my team. And I think that's been the thing that's most different. I think when people talk about freedom and flexibility, they think about freedom of place and freedom of time. Yeah. But there really is freedom, I think, to create a really unique career path for yourself, and in my case, for my agency.
Well, that makes sense. And you talked about all the extra time you work. It makes sense. There's an old joke that when you're an entrepreneur, which all 4 of you are, when you're an entrepreneur, you get the freedom to choose which 4 hours a day you're not working. So there you go. Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. Would you go back to a traditional job if it was so offered to you?
It's such a great question, and I think about it often. And I've actually had clients through Upwork who have offered me full, more of a full-time role. Yes, I never say no to anything. I think that I would consider any opportunity, certainly, but at the same time, I wouldn't go back to the way that I used to work. I actually just left media in January. I've been freelancing for about 8 years, and kind of looking at what I was doing versus what I'm doing now, I think that it would need to be a role that was much more similar to what I'm doing now. I can't see myself getting on the train for 2 hours and working from 8 to 6 and getting back on the train and kind of being bound by that very traditional structure. I think it wasn't really working for me, and I think especially now, kind of in this COVID landscape, I don't know a lot of people who that's necessarily going to work for going forward.
Brad, how does independent work, like what you do on Upwork, how is that different for you in your experience from your full-time experiences?
Well, yeah. So the whole reason I got into freelancing was because there weren't a lot of jobs around that did the emerging technologies I was interested in whenever I got started, which is augmented and virtual reality. So um, my freelance work differs quite a bit because I was looking for some full-time jobs that did that. And although there were some that kind of fit the bill, there were never any that were directly what I was trying to do. So starting to freelance, I kind of realized that a lot of the ways that it differs as well is that you have a ton of different options for the types of projects that you take on. So
Right.
you don't have to specialize into some specific industry or into a specific task of a specific industry, but you get a lot of different variety of projects. And so that is one thing that I'm very grateful for.
Yunshi, finally, putting it to you, if you received a full-time job offer, would you take it?
Very similar to Jamie, it would, you never want to say no to an opportunity because, startups, there's so many amazing things that are happening in the world, especially post COVID.
Yeah.
But it would never be what I did before. It would have to look very similar to this, and it would have to be something I'm passionate about as well.
Got it. Got it. David, next question I'll pose to you. What has Upwork enabled for you and or your family to do?
Oh man, so I'm so thankful for Upwork. Family is one of the most important things in my life, and that's why I chose freelancing as a career path. So, it's really given us the freedom, the flexibility, and funds, honestly, to do whatever we want. We've been able to design our life in a super fluid, flexible way. A small example would be going to Target with my wife at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning to something really big like taking my family to Australia for 5 weeks and creating memories that will last forever.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah,
Yeah, that sounds great. I sure can't do that. I'm just kidding. Yunshi, I'm going to put this question to you. Have you seen the project demands and requirements change in light of the current crisis?
Surprisingly, yes. Being a fractional CMO, when I was starting to do it just a few years ago, it just wasn't that popular. No one was really looking for like an executive part of the time or for projects. But now I'm seeing a huge demand where they're needing people to focus on strategy. They want people to talk about what's going to happen next. How should we be pivoting? Should we take a look at our products in a very different way? And honestly, oftentimes their current team doesn't have the skill sets to effectively do that. So hiring someone like me as a fractional CMO gives them insight because I've worked in so
Yeah.
many different industries.
Right.
It gives them kind of the cheat code, essentially, of how to be able to move forward effectively. And so I'm seeing the rise of companies wanting to deal with fractional executives because you get all the benefits without any of the downsides.
David, what are you seeing on project requirements? How are they changed, say, in the last few months since COVID-19 created this new environment?
yeah. So I think everyone was forced to go online. So I think people are getting a lot more comfortable working remotely. They're seeing that there's a lot more professionals out there. So I've actually seen a huge increase in job opportunity where elsewhere there's a huge downturn. So I'm super busy. So which is very interesting in the pandemic. We're lucky that we're already set up. We're used to this platform, so we have a head start on some of those people coming in. But innovation is everywhere, and innovation is coming out of the woodwork during this COVID-19 pandemic. People are coming up with new ideas to sanitize things, new masks, new everything. So as a product designer, there's so much opportunity.
I want to go back to you, Yanqi. How do you see your business evolving in light of all these changes?
Surprisingly, I'm actually seeing it evolving beyond marketing, because marketing has shifted dramatically just in the last 5 years alone. I'm seeing things become more focused around performance management, where we're dealing with interdepartmental communication, how marketing is impacting sales, how it impacts operations, HR, so on and so forth. So we're seeing a new ecosystem being created, where accountability has to happen within each department. So I am finding myself pivoting to doing more performance management consulting and helping them comprehend internally and externally how to create a more cohesive environment so that they're relating to their prospects and their customers in a more humanized fashion, because that's what COVID has done. It's made us be more human, and we have to look at things in a very different lens.
Jamie, how about you? How is your business evolving in light of the current situation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We've been very fortunate. We've been very, very busy, and I think in the very beginning, it was busy. Like I think David was saying, everybody needed something. Everybody needed, whether it was like a simple pop up saying we're still open, to an email, to I think we wrote something like 84, 85 emails in the first week, just assuring our clients that things are okay. They were open for business. And so it was sort of that initial knee-jerk reaction. But since then, to the others' points, everybody's online. Folks who have been thinking about launching a business are launching businesses now. Brands that needed kind of a minute to revisit and refresh are doing that. And we're hearing from a lot of them. We're hearing from a lot of folks who have just been so busy trying to keep up. And while, of course, this is all very, unfortunate, it's given a lot of brands an opportunity to hit pause, take a breath, figure out what they're going to do next. And that's where I think a lot of our work has been coming from. It's been a lot of rebrands, relaunches, refreshes, and new business launches. But in a very different way than before. People are very conscious that this could happen again. There could be other hurdles down the road. So I think brands are being a lot smarter, a lot leaner, and just a lot more thoughtful in how they're going to market.
Gotcha. Brad, I want to put this next one to you. What are some of the emerging skills where you're starting to see demand from clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like everybody said, this season has definitely driven a lot of technological advances in virtual environments for people. I think our industry, which is augmented and virtual reality, is an emerging technology itself. So I do get a lot of people asking kind of what are some feasibility possibilities for their industry, which really it's actually possible to be used in any industry. And so a lot of the emerging skill sets of AR and VR that are also starting to be required or asked about is some face tracking, body tracking, photogrammetry. Just how do you make spaces feel very realistic and comfortable for people in a virtual environment, so it doesn't feel like this static thing, or trying to just involve people even more, since we kind of are off by ourselves currently or working remotely. How do you make it feel still collaborative and team oriented?
Right. Yeah. There is a real push to virtualize the entire value chain. I mean, from how we work together to how we create and deliver customer value, even how we market. And I can only imagine it's really been for you a huge palette of challenges and opportunities. David, let me put this to you. Same question. What emerging skill sets are you seeing demand for these days?
I'm seeing a lot of the same. Technology is driving a lot of this. So I'm actually seeing augmented reality prototypes as well. So looking at 3D models in real space to get a sense of proportion, size, VR renderings, VR sketching even. So, it's pretty much the same. New technologies will drive innovation, and that will drive the market. So yeah, I'm excited to learn all that stuff too.
Great. I want to keep this conversation going with everybody on this. Yunshi, I'm coming to you. What kind of skill set requests are you seeing coming from clients that you work with and or job postings that you're seeing?
Data. The companies really want marketers to understand data. And that's just one equation of it. Because one thing I try to help them to understand is that data just tells one part of the story, but then you have to humanize that with how you speak to your customers. And also internally, if your employees aren't buying in, you have an internal brand problem. So having marketers that really comprehend data, how to effectively use that data, and then implement that on how to optimize and pivot moving forward. And there's kind of a disconnect because the education that is currently in college does not teach this effectively. It's kind of, it's like a hands-on skill set. I know when I got my degree, I was not learning this. This was definitely something I learned in the field. So there's some things that we have to be mindful of, that we're going to have to catch up to, because while COVID has happened, there's still a whole community of people who have not yet caught up to these skill sets. So we have to be gentle with some of our expectations.
Right. Great. That's great. Great advice there. Over to you, Jamie. What skill set demands are you seeing?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing a lot of, and this isn't new, but the levels which we're seeing it, I think is really heightened, which is thought leadership. Folks are really interested in thought leadership programs. A few years ago, it was big companies who and we were executing thought leadership campaigns for, CEOs at major Fortune 500 companies. But now it's not, now it's folks who are launching a business and, realize that there's so much value to being seen as a thought leader, from everything from a search perspective to, earned media perspective to just, getting invited to things, getting invited to keynotes or to events. And so we are getting requests from folks who are launching businesses, who are, writers who want to be heard more, just this huge breadth and depth of different professionals who are wanting to be seen as thought leaders in the space. And I think obviously direct impact of sort of the influencer kind of culture, but these are all people who, have a great voice and a great message. And we've been getting a lot of requests for kind of very 360 programs that will get them out there.
Got it. Wow. So what range of skill sets showing up as high demand on the platform? I think it's all interesting. Let's have a fun question here. This is going to be an everybody answers it thing. We're going to start with you, Yunshi. What is the coolest project you've ever worked on with a client?
I'd have to say the coolest project I ever worked on was when I worked with a data center company, and we were doing an open house event. It was an empty warehouse, and we needed to showcase it in a fun way because nothing was built out. It was just an empty platform. So we turned it into a Cirque du Soleil themed night where we had golf carts going back and forth within the data center. We had people dancing aerials in the air. We had fire dancers throughout. Every section became very experience-based because we wanted people to not only experience the data center space, but experience what type of customer service they would get from the client. And to this day, that was the largest event that they had ever put on, and it's still talked about. And that was like 5 years ago.
Very interesting. Okay, Brad, over to you. Coolest project you've ever worked on with a client?
Yeah, that is a really hard question. I find most of our projects very cool. And then there's like a nerdy research cool, and then there's a creative cool, like artistic cool. And I don't know which one to go here, but I find one of the projects that we just finished was for an art gallery who's closed down due to COVID, and they wanted people to still experience the exhibits. And I thought it was pretty cool that we had the opportunity to use augmented reality to build an application out where people can now take the sculptures from Cami Staros, who's the sculpture artist. They can take them and they can place them right in their home. They can get really close and inspect them. But even cooler is we were able to build out an augmented reality portal. And so what happens is you can place a door anywhere you want, whether outside or inside. But if you walk through that door, you're fully immersed into a virtual gallery of the Lux Art Institute, almost like a digital twin. And so they're able to physically walk around as if they were at the gallery, using their device as kind of the mirror into that world and view the artwork. And because it's augmented reality, we have capabilities that you're not able to do in the real world. So what we do actually while they're touring the gallery as we start to flood the area. And eventually they're underwater viewing the artwork in almost an ancient ruins type of an environment, because that was the inspiration behind the artwork. So I found that very cool, because we were able to put even more thought and inspiration behind the artwork than what you'd even get at a typical gallery. So I think that was one of the most fun projects we've done in a long time.
Wow. Okay. Jamie, over to you. What's the coolest project you've worked on with a client?
There's so many really great ones. We worked on a project pretty recently for a tech company, and part of the mandate, and we get this a lot, is trying to take really complex themes and make them accessible, because decision makers aren't always, super well versed in a lot of the decisions that they're a lot of the kind of tech decisions. And it was actually a really cool project. We had writers in 17 countries, and we were publishing about 100 to 150 articles a week on different platforms. And so it was pretty wild. We were able to secure publishing credentials on about 300 websites and blogs and things like that. And the team, would get their prompts every week, and we had sort of a very regimented publishing schedule. But, over the course of about 15 weeks, we published, thousands of articles on all of these different industry sites and, business sites, which just drove tremendous traffic back to the client, was tremendous for search, really kind of got them out as this global name. But what was so interesting was just in a lot of ways how simple it was. I think they thought doing this would just require so much, work and so much time, but we were able to really get up and running in about 2 weeks. And, you've never really edited an article until you've edited it in 14 languages that you don't speak. So that was a really cool project, just kind of given the scope and just the kind of global nature of the team.
Okay then. David, finally to you, what was the coolest project you've ever worked on?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest question of the entire panel, because I'm super lucky and I get to work on some really cool projects. And a lot of them I can't talk to you about.
Okay.
But you might think that, my playgrounds from Little Tykes are really cool, or the camping products from Coleman are really cool. But I think the coolest projects for me are that ones that have an impact in the world. One example of this would be a football helmet called Hit Guard. It's a 2-piece football helmet. In between the 2 pieces are 4 struts. When players hit the ground or each other, the top one takes all the impact, so your head doesn't take the impact. And this is really going to help, prevent concussions. It's going to, help players. It's going to help the sport of football. It's, gained a lot of notoriety. It's, won awards from the NFL. We've tested it at Virginia Tech. It got a 5-star rating and performed at one of the top rated helmets in the industry, all from just a prototype. So I think really it's about helping people and helping my client, whose dream was to make this become a reality. So, yeah.
All right, there's another question for the entire panel. We're actually going to start with you, Jamie. What's a myth, a misconception, if you will, about either independent professionals or working on Upwork that you'd like to bust?
Absolutely. I think there's a myth that, there's so many people on a platform like Upwork, and I think that that's so important. I think that there needs to be enough diverse talent in terms of skills and experience and price points to really fit the needs of all of the different clients. Not everybody, is going to be able to, bring someone on who has certain kind of experience, but maybe they can look for, rising talent or something like that. At the same time, though, one of the things I do think that I talk to a lot of clients about is they feel like because there's so much that's not for them, that maybe hiring independent talent isn't for them. And that's such a kind of silly thing to say or to think. There's so many folks looking for independent talent that, again, I think there needs to just be so many options out there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single person on the platform is for you. And so I think, like anything else, you don't just like marry the first person you go on a date with, or maybe you do. But I think people sort of have to kind of have an open mind when they're on a platform like Upwork, when they're looking for independent talent. There's such a range of talent. And it's really important to find the right fit for your business. And that might not be the first person who pops up in the search. And I do, again, I hear that a lot where folks say, well, I emailed 10 different people and, none of them this. Well, but we connected, but we were able to connect and we're a good fit. So, I think that it's just like job interviews, just like anything. I think there's this sort of expectation that you'll just go onto a platform like Upwork, find the person instantly and kind of ride off into the sunset. But, there should be vetting, there should be an engagement process, there should be a conversation and, sort of a vetting. And I think people need to remember that.
Brad, what about you? What myth do you want to bust?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest myths that impacted me early on in freelancing years ago was that people always asked me, like, what was the next step? Like, they never thought that this was a permanent job opportunity. It was always like, oh, okay, you're just temporarily freelancing, but what are you going to do in the future? And I don't think they realized that we're working with multiple Fortune 100 companies, like building integrative workflows like for them and making their product and their services better.
Right.
And so I think it's always been this thing where people kind of see what we do and consulting and freelancing as something that's not quite good enough for an internal team, but something that's, just like temporary. So that's always been something I love to bust. And I'll show them our apps and like show them for the big companies and how they're integrated into them. They're like, wait, you guys built this? They didn't build this internally? And that's fun to watch because that busts the myths itself.
Right. Okay. Yunchi, what about you? What myth do you want to go after?
I'd have to say the myth that if you're freelancing, or kind of the idea that why are you freelancing opposed to being like in a job, right? If you're good enough to be a fractional CMO or you've been a VP, why aren't you just doing that thing? And the idea is that typically when you're in an environment like that, you get capped at a certain level. You can only go so high up and you end up capped oftentimes in a particular industry.
Right.
So when you're freelancing, you have the ability to be able to work in biotech and technology and in transportation and in all of these different sectors. So it gives you a breadth of experience that's very unique compared to most VPs or CMOs out there in the marketplace. And so that's the one thing that I always tell my clients is that you can go and take a VP that's worked at Apple or Amazon or whatever for the last decade, but they're only going to know that industry. I know at least 5 other industries that I've worked intimately with over the last 15 years. So you're going to get a type of agency / intimate kind of experience. So I think it's really important for companies to really begin understanding that in order to move forward, in order to really value, innovate, you need the mindsets of people who have had experiences and done very well in various industries in their particular sector. So taking into consideration, taking off the notion that it has to be this one way,
right,
when in reality we need a new way of thinking to produce better results for a new generation.
Absolutely. And you do work in diversity and inclusion, and this is really speaking to, it's that when we bring the diversity of perspectives into a project environment, we bring so much creativity, so much innovative thinking, so much opportunity to really do something that's original. I think the point that you make too here is that we have to embrace and we have to value that. We have to understand whether it's a diversity and inclusion or just diversity of work experience. This makes a huge and fundamental difference. Finally, David, what myth for you to bust?
Oh, isn't busting myths fun?
It's fun.
So one of my favorite myths is that freelancing is risky or not consistent. And, I think it's almost the polar opposite because being, an employee is super risky. You have one sell of the company and your job's gone, where I'm working with 10 clients. If one gets sold, I have the 9 others to sit on. And both, not only from a freelancer perspective, but from an employer's perspective, it takes a ton of time and effort to onboard somebody, to move them from a different location. And what if they don't work with your culture? What if their style or brand language doesn't work with your product? So, you can test freelancers and then you can add on more work as you see fit. So I think it's really, about risk, and your risk is very low with a freelancer.
That makes sense. I agree. As a matter of fact, a lot of the research I've seen on a real value of working with independent professionals is that you de-risk your very high-risk innovation projects, allowing you to get more swings at the plate as an enterprise. So I certainly couldn't agree more with your point of view here. Okay, last question for all the panel, and I think this one will be a great for the viewers, the enterprise viewers that are watching this. Tell us, what makes it easier for you as an independent professional to work with a client? In other words, what can a client do to make the working experience more efficient on their side? I'm going to start with you, Jamie.
Sure. So I asked my whole team, and we universally agreed. You have to go into it, clients, with a mindset that edit is not a 4-letter word. All of our work, most of our work is really anchored in content and creative design. Chances are we've never worked with you before, and even though we have a really tight onboarding process, even though we consider ourselves to be real experts in the field, even though you've seen our samples and loved them and that's why you hired us, the first draft is meant to be a first draft. Right. And that is all. And very often I say to clients from the beginning, I just want you to have something to react to, because it's impossible. We could talk about this for hours and hours and days, but I have no way to know that my blue is your blue until I give you something to yay or nay. And we do like to give clients lots of different options, especially in first drafts. But at the same time, we do have clients who have, after a first draft, been like, this isn't what I expected. I expected to be further along. Yeah. I expected this. Yeah. We get it. That's why we build in multiple rounds of revisions, because I'll be honest, if a client approves something after a first draft, I want to get on the phone with the client and dig a little deeper, because something's probably not right. Maybe they didn't look at everything. Maybe they didn't read everything. But, while we like to think we're experts and are going to hit it out of the park the first time, there should always be feedback on a first round. There should always be revisions. There should always be something we could do a little bit better in round 2. And so we try to set that expectation from the beginning, but I cannot encourage folks enough when you're working with independent freelancers. You've hired someone because of their skills, because it aligns. But know that it is a collaboration, know that it is a partnership, and it does really require your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I often look at a first draft like a prototype, right? My mentor taught me years ago the value of a prototype is that you can point to something and say, that's not it. So I love your point of view. Brad, over to you. What's the best way for a client to work with you? What's the most efficient way for them to work with you?
Yeah, well, we have a pretty exact way of how we do things. So we'll first start with a consulting and kind of feasibility study with the client, kind of figure out what their ideas are, what they want, and then help them bring in some concept and some ideas behind what actually works best for them. And then we move in more into the planning phase, which I feel like is kind of what Jamie's hinting at. That's such an important phase that a lot of times clients forget about whenever they're doing a consulting or freelancing. They just expect for it just to kind of magically happen the way that they envisioned it. But that planning phase is actually very important. So we'll move from that conceptual and feasibility study into planning, and then we'll get into kind of the milestones, set up deliverables with the client, start doing the R&D, and then build and implement it, and then finally the delivery. But the best thing that I can advise for people who are hiring consulting companies and kind of working with us as a top-rated freelancers on Upwork is just to first build that trusting relationship with each other. Because once you have that trusting relationship, everything is so much easier. If I tell you that I'm working on something, but we have to figure this problem out, you guys trust that, okay, this is still being moved along. It's not something that they've forgotten about. It's not something that we're missing. And if you guys tell me that, we got to wait 2 weeks before we can start this, there's no kind of doubt on our side that we'll continue on the project. So I think the trust is a huge thing. But then, of course, planning and making sure that everybody's on the same page prior to starting is important.
Absolutely. Yunshi, tell us, how can clients more efficiently work with you? What's the process that works the best for you with our enterprise clients?
What I found is that's always worked best is starting out with, number one, identifying all of the key stakeholders. Because oftentimes the problem that they think they have is really a bigger problem of something that they haven't diagnosed. whether that's a gap in skill sets, a gap in communication, or simply dealing with someone who is in charge but not really a good leader. So there's a couple of things that we have to take a look at. And so I go through and I do a gap analysis of situation first to really identify who are we working with, what are we dealing with, because at the end of the day, the three core things that end up being delivered no matter what product or service you have is you should be saving your client time, money, or energy. That's what I'm there to do.
Right.
And if we are not there for that, then we're dealing with ego. And there's really no room for ego in the business. So when we identify that as an issue, we want to go ahead and remove that because that begins to affect the team. So when I go through and I do the gap analysis, I'm very aware of who I'm dealing with key stakeholders. We leverage tools like Asana to project manage everything because emails can get so crazy, so intense.
Right.
And I like to be very clear on what we're doing, when we're doing it, so they can have a level of expectation of when we'll deliver, based upon what we've talked about. And then things that we identify moving forward, because oftentimes, like I said, we'll begin a project and then realize, oh, well, you're having this issue because you don't know how to communicate with the design team. So let's create a process that simplifies that. So then we end up doing some process documentation and implementation to create a more cohesive environment. So, with me, you're not getting just a marketer per se, or, as some people say, oh, you're just a marketer. Well, no, you're getting a performance management consultant, someone who comes in and diagnoses what's happening and how to take it, and make it better for you moving forward.
Your perspective is to step back and see the higher order picture, solve the higher order problem. It's so consistent with what Peter Sheehan, our keynote from earlier today, talked about, and that is whether you're a business owner or an enterprise leader or a professional, being able to step back and think about the bigger problem you're trying to solve is a way that we add value and do work that really matters. So I love that. David, you're going to bring us home here. Rules of working with David to get the best David from David. Go.
Well, it's easy. Communication is the key to any successful project. I've been doing this for 14 years, and if you're on the same page, you get results.
Right.
If you put out a good brief, you're going to attract higher talent. You're going to attract lower bids because we know exactly what you're looking for. The second key is trust, something that Brad, touched on. If you hired us for a reason, so sit back and relax and let me drive you to your destination. I know exactly where you want to go. So in any relationship, trust and communication goes a long way, both professionally and personally. And it's really as easy as that.
Absolutely, and I'd like to add to that, establishing a response level agreement, sort of like thinking like a service level agreement, setting that up with a client or a client setting that up with you. How long it's going to take to hear from you is probably part of what you're talking to, right? I mean, the idea that there's some upfront agreement on how you're going to communicate to make this process less stressful and more efficient.
Exactly, no surprises.
Got it. Awesome. Folks, this has been a very enlightening and very interesting conversation. I know I've taken away a lot from it. I know our viewers here from the enterprise world, our partners are really benefited by your contributions today. So I want to thank every single one of you. I'm just going to say this again because you deserve a little billing here. And what I mean by that is billing as in promotion, not billing as in you're going to bill me. Brad Martin is an AR/VR specialist. He's the founder of Another Reality Studio. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for the wave. David Kibble, a product and industrial designer. David, thank you. Jamie Hollander, a marketing leader and the founder of RRDA. Thank you so much, Jamie. And then finally, Yunchi Wilson, fractional CMO and the owner of Solomon Bell Consulting. Thank you very much, Yunchi. These are just some of the examples of the independent professionals you'll find on our platform that not only have a high professional skill set, they have business acumen, as you can see. They're entrepreneurs. They have a process by which they do their work and deliver their value. This is the kind of thing you can find all day long on Upwork. Thank you.